Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed herself against the rocky outcrop as plasma bolts seared the air above her head. The alien war cries echoed through the canyon, a sound that made even seasoned soldiers freeze in terror. But not Sarah. She had heard worse during the siege of New Geneva. The Catherian assault force had caught her patrol completely off guard. These reptilian warriors stood 3 meters tall, their scaled hides deflecting most human weapons. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth could produce, but humanity had learned to fight smart. Not fair. Sarah's squad of 40 Marines was pinned, down in a narrow valley on the planet Kepler 442b. What should have been a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into a nightmare when Catherian dropships appeared from nowhere. The aliens had superior numbers, better weapons, and the high ground. Everything about this situation screamed certain death. She watched helplessly as Corporal Martinez took a plasma blast to the chest. The young man from Texas had been joking about his sister's cooking just minutes before. Now he lay motionless behind a boulder, his rifle still smoking in his hands. Sarah felt the familiar rage building inside her chest, the same fury that had carried her through 3 years of this impossible war. The Catherians were methodically working their way down the canyon walls. Their energy shields flickered blue as they advanced, deflecting the desperate return fire from her trapped soldiers. Sarah counted at least 60 aliens, maybe more. Her tactical display showed ammunition running critically low across all positions. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through her helmet comm. "They're flanking us from the north ridge. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they have a clear shot at everyone." Sarah studied her tactical map with growing desperation. The nearest human reinforcements were hours away. Orbital support was unavailable due to the Catherian fleet controlling the upper atmosphere. Her soldiers were brave, but bravery wouldn't stop plasma cannons designed to melt through starship hulls. Then she saw it, a narrow ledge about 200 meters up the canyon wall, barely visible through the smoke and chaos. If someone could reach that position, they would have a perfect view of the entire Catherian formation. More importantly, they would be within range to call in an artillery strike from the human firebase hidden in the next valley. The problem was getting there. The path was completely exposed to enemy fire. Anyone attempting that climb would be target practice for dozens of alien warriors. Sarah calculated the odds in her head and didn't like the answer. It was essentially a suicide mission. She keyed her comm to address the entire squad. "All units, this is Chen. I need someone to reach the observation point at grid reference 77 Alpha. We can call in fire support from there." The silence that followed spoke volumes. Every Marine in that canyon knew what she was really asking. Sarah understood their hesitation. She was asking one of them to die so the others might live. "I'll do it, Lieutenant." The voice belonged to Private Jackson, barely 19 years old. "My gear's lightest and I'm a good climber." "Negative, Jackson. Stay in position." Sarah was already checking her own equipment. Her pulse rifle had 2 magazines left. Her armor's power cell showed 60% charge. More importantly, she had the command codes needed to authorize the artillery strike. Sarah took one last look at her soldiers. Rodriguez was methodically placing shots, making every bullet count. Davis was treating wounded Marines with supplies that wouldn't last much longer. These 40 men and women had followed her into hell more times than she could count. Now it was her turn to lead from the front. She started climbing before anyone could object. The first 50 meters weren't too bad. Sarah moved like a spider across the canyon wall, using every crack and shadow for cover. Her enhanced military training kicked in automatically, muscle memory guiding her movements while her mind focused on the bigger picture. The Catherians were still concentrating their fire on her trapped soldiers below. A plasma bolt exploded against the rock face just inches from her helmet. The aliens had spotted her. Sarah pressed herself flat against the stone as more energy blasts turned the cliff into a light show of sparks and molten debris. She could hear their alien voices growing excited as they realized what she was attempting. Sarah forced herself to keep climbing. Every handhold felt like it might be her last. The enhanced gravity of Kepler 442b made each movement exhausting, and her armor added another 100 pounds to her frame. Sweat poured down her face inside her helmet as she hauled herself up another meter. The tactical situation below was deteriorating rapidly. Through her helmet's rear camera, Sarah could see Catherian shock troops advancing on her soldiers' positions. Rodriguez and his team were putting up fierce resistance, but they were being overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. She counted at least 15 Marines down already. Halfway to her target, Sarah's left boot slipped on loose rock. For a terrifying moment, she dangled by her fingertips as plasma fire lit up the space where she had been. Sharp stone cut through her gloves and she felt blood making her grip slippery. The 200-meter drop yawned beneath her like an open grave. With a grunt of effort, Sarah hauled herself back against the cliff face. She couldn't afford to think about the fall. Couldn't afford to think about the plasma bolts seeking her flesh. The only thing that mattered was reaching that ledge and calling in the strike that would save her people. The Catherians were getting smarter about their targeting. Instead of wild shots, they were coordinating their fire to cut off her possible routes. Sarah found herself trapped behind a narrow stone pillar, unable to advance without exposing herself to certain death. Below, she could hear the alien war cries getting closer to her soldiers. That's when she made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Sarah pulled a fragmentation grenade from her belt and hurled it down at the nearest group of Catherians. The explosion wouldn't do much against their armor, but it would provide the distraction she needed. The moment the grenade detonated, Sarah broke cover and sprinted across an exposed section of cliff face. Plasma bolts filled the air around her like deadly fireworks. She felt the heat of near misses cooking the air in her lungs. One blast clipped her shoulder armor, spinning her around and nearly sending her tumbling into space. Sarah regained her balance and kept climbing. 70 meters, 80, 90. Each meter gained felt like a small victory against impossible odds. Her muscles screamed in protest, and her armor's cooling system struggled to keep up with her exertion. The observation ledge seemed to grow more distant with every step. A new sound reached her ears through the chaos of battle. The deep rumble of Catherian heavy weapons being brought into position. Sarah risked a glance down and felt her heart sink. The aliens were setting up plasma cannons capable of melting through reinforced bunkers. Her soldiers wouldn't last 5 minutes once those weapons opened fire. She had maybe 3 minutes to reach the ledge and call in the strike. After that, the 40 best Marines she had ever served with would become vapor and ash, scattered across an alien canyon. Sarah pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the protests from her overtaxed muscles. The rock face grew steeper as she climbed higher. What had looked like handholds from below turned out to be shallow cracks that barely supported her weight. Sarah found herself making desperate leaps from one precarious grip to another, trusting her life to friction and momentum. One mistake would end everything. At 150 meters, disaster struck. A perfectly aimed plasma bolt caught Sarah's left leg just below the knee. The energy beam burned through her armor like it was made of paper, cooking flesh and shattering bone in an instant. The pain was beyond description, a white-hot agony that made her vision blur and her hands shake. Sarah almost fell then. Almost let go and ended the suffering with a quick drop to the canyon floor. But the sound of her soldiers fighting for their lives below kept her fingers locked around the rock. She had come too far to quit now. Sarah hung against the cliff face, fighting waves of nausea as shock tried to shut down her system. Her left leg was completely useless now. Nothing but dead weight and screaming nerve endings. Blood poured from the wound, making the rocks below slippery and treacherous. But she was still 50 meters from the ledge. The Catherians sensed her weakness. Their fire intensified, plasma bolts creating a deadly net around her position. They knew she was wounded and trapped. All they had to do was wait for blood loss or exhaustion to finish what their weapons had started. Sarah could hear their alien laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Below, the situation was becoming desperate. The heavy plasma cannons were almost in position, their barrel tips glowing with deadly energy. Sarah watched through her helmet display as Sergeant Rodriguez tried to coordinate one last defensive push. Her Marines were down to their final magazines and medical supplies were exhausted. 3 more soldiers fell as she watched. Sarah made a choice that defied every survival instinct in her body. Using her knife, she cut away the damaged sections of her leg armor that were weighing her down. The metal clattered into the abyss below, taking with it her last hope of protecting the wound. Now she had to climb with exposed, mangled flesh. The pain nearly made her black out. Sarah bit down on her tongue until she tasted blood, using one agony to fight another. She forced her right leg to take all her weight while her arms pulled her higher up the cliff. Every movement sent fresh waves of torture through her shattered bones. Plasma fire continued to rain down around her. The Catherians were taking their time now, enjoying the hunt. They fired in coordinated volleys, forcing Sarah to time her movements between the deadly light shows. One bolt passed so close to her head that it melted part of her helmet's faceplate. At 170 meters, Sarah's strength finally gave out. Her hands cramped and released their grip, sending her sliding down the rock face. For a terrifying moment, she thought it was over. Then her boot caught in a crack, jerking her to a painful stop. The impact drove bone fragments deeper into her wounded leg, but it also saved her life. Sarah hung upside down for several precious seconds, blood rushing to her head while plasma bolts sought her flesh. The world spun around her like a nightmare carnival ride. She could hear her own heart beating like a drum in her ears, each pulse weaker than the last. Blood loss was taking its toll. With tremendous effort, Sarah managed to right herself and find new handholds. The ledge was only 30 meters away now, but it might as well have been on another planet. Her vision kept blurring and her hands shook with exhaustion. The Catherians had stopped firing, confident that gravity would finish their work for them. That confidence proved to be their mistake. Sarah used the brief respite to inject herself with combat stimulants from her medical kit. The drugs hit her system like liquid lightning, temporarily masking the pain and giving her muscles new strength. It was a dangerous gamble that could stop her heart, but she was out of alternatives. The stimulants bought her 20 meters of progress before her body started shutting down again. At 190 meters, Sarah's right leg gave out completely. The plasma wound had done more damage than she realized, severing muscles and nerves that she needed for climbing. Both legs were now useless appendages dragging her toward death. Sarah found herself 10 meters from salvation with no way to reach it. The observation ledge taunted her from above, so close she could see the perfect firing position it would provide. From there, she could coordinate artillery strikes that would turn the Catherian formation into smoking craters. All she had to do was climb 10 more meters with 2 broken legs and failing strength. The sound of heavy weapons charging up echoed through the canyon. The Catherian plasma cannons were ready to fire. In 30 seconds, maybe less, her 40 Marines would be reduced to atomic particles. Sarah looked down at her soldiers one last time, memorizing their faces through her helmet's magnification. These were good people who deserved better than dying in an alien canyon light years from home. Rodriguez caught her eye through his scope and gave her a small salute. Even at this distance, Sarah could see the resignation in his posture. He knew they were all about to die, but he was still fighting, still trying to take as many aliens with him as possible. That stubborn courage was the most human thing Sarah had ever witnessed. She began to crawl. With both legs useless, Sarah pulled herself up the remaining 10 meters using nothing but her arms and sheer determination. Her fingernails broke against the stone. Her elbows bled through her armor. But she kept moving, inch by agonizing inch, while death waited patiently below. Sarah's hands were raw and bloody by the time she hauled herself onto the narrow ledge. The observation post was barely 3 meters wide, carved into the cliff face by geological forces millions of years ago. But it offered a perfect view of the entire Catherian formation spread out below, like pieces on a chessboard. The aliens had positioned themselves exactly where Sarah had hoped they would. Military doctrine was apparently universal across species. The Catherians had arranged their forces in a classic hammer and anvil formation, concentrating their firepower to crush her trapped Marines. What they didn't know was that this positioning made them perfect targets for artillery. Sarah's tactical computer automatically began calculating firing solutions as she activated her communications array. The human firebase in the neighboring valley had been standing by for over an hour, waiting for target coordinates. Now she just had to stay conscious long enough to guide their shells onto target. The first challenge was establishing contact. The canyon's mineral composition interfered with radio signals, forcing Sarah to boost her transmitter to maximum power. This would make her position visible to every Catherian sensor in the area, but stealth was no longer an option. She keyed her mic with shaking hands. Firebase Tango, this is Lieutenant Chen. I have multiple targets for immediate fire mission. Over. The response came back scratchy but clear. Chen, this is Firebase Tango. We've been waiting for you. Send your coordinates. Below, the Catherian heavy weapons were beginning their final preparations. Sarah could see the aliens adjusting their plasma cannons, fine-tuning the targeting systems that would vaporize her soldiers. She had maybe 90 seconds before they opened fire. Her fingers flew across her tactical display, uploading targeting data as fast as the system would accept it. Target package uploaded. Sarah transmitted. Fire for effect on my command. Roger Chen. Rounds incoming in 45 seconds. Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. Artillery shells were already arcing through the alien sky, carrying enough explosive power to level city blocks. In less than a minute, the Catherian formation would be nothing but smoking craters. Her soldiers would live to fight another day. That's when she heard the distinctive whine of Catherian interceptor drones launching from concealed positions. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she watched dozens of small aircraft rise from the canyon floor. The aliens had anticipated human artillery tactics and prepared countermeasures. Her carefully planned strike was about to be shot down by automated defenses. The interceptor drones moved with inhuman precision, their sensors already locking onto the incoming artillery shells. Sarah watched in horror as the first wave of projectiles disappeared in brilliant flashes of light. The aliens were systematically destroying her fire mission before it could reach the target area. Sarah's mind raced through alternatives. She could call for another strike, but the drones would intercept that one too. She could try to take out the interceptors with her rifle, but they were too fast and too numerous for small arms fire. Every option led to the same conclusion: her soldiers were still going to die. Then Sarah remembered something from her advanced tactics training. Interceptor drones worked by detecting incoming projectiles and calculating intercept courses. But their targeting systems had limitations. They could track multiple objects, but not infinite numbers. If she could overwhelm their processing capacity, some shells might get through. "Firebase Tango, I need you to fire everything you have," Sarah transmitted urgently. "Empty all tubes simultaneously. Overwhelm their defenses with volume. Chen, that's our entire ammunition supply. If this doesn't work, we'll be defenseless." Sarah watched another wave of interceptors launch as the Catherian cannons reached full charge. She could see her Marines below, crouched behind inadequate cover, waiting for death to find them. The decision was easy. "Do it," she ordered. "Fire everything." The response from Firebase Tango was immediate. Sarah felt the vibrations through the canyon walls as every artillery piece in the human arsenal opened fire simultaneously. The sky filled with incoming shells, more projectiles than the interceptor drones could possibly handle. Their targeting computers began making desperate calculations, trying to prioritize threats in an impossible situation. Some shells were intercepted. Sarah watched dozens of them disappear in flashes of alien technology, but others got through. The overwhelming volume of fire had confused the drones just as she had hoped. Several artillery rounds slipped past the defensive screen and began their final approach to the target area. Sarah activated her laser designator, painting targets for the incoming shells. Her hands shook with exhaustion and blood loss, but her training held firm. She marked the Catherian command post first, then the heavy weapons positions, finally the main troop concentrations. Each target received its own designated round. The first shell hit the command post with devastating accuracy. The explosion vaporized 3 Catherian officers and their entire communication array. Suddenly, the alien formation was blind and leaderless, their coordination shattered by a single well-placed round. More shells found their marks. The heavy plasma cannons that had threatened her soldiers were reduced to twisted metal and alien corpses. Troop concentrations became smoking craters. In less than 30 seconds, the perfectly organized Catherian attack turned into chaos and confusion. But Sarah's work wasn't finished. Scattered groups of aliens were already trying to regroup and counterattack. She adjusted her targeting data, calling in precision strikes on surviving enemy positions. Each shell had to count now because ammunition was running low at Firebase Tango. The Catherian survivors were not giving up easily. Sarah watched through her scope as alien squad leaders tried to rally their scattered forces. These reptilian warriors had conquered dozens of worlds, and they weren't about to be defeated by a single human artillery strike. They began advancing on her soldiers' positions with renewed determination. Sarah continued calling in precise fire missions, but ammunition at Firebase Tango was nearly exhausted. Each shell had to eliminate maximum enemy forces or risk letting the Catherians regroup. She targeted choke points and cover positions, forcing the aliens into the open where her Marines could engage them with small arms fire. Below in the canyon, Sergeant Rodriguez had recognized the changing tactical situation. He organized the surviving Marines into fire teams and began a coordinated counterattack. The Catherians found themselves caught between artillery strikes from above and rifle fire from below. Their superior numbers were becoming less relevant in the face of human tactical flexibility. Sarah's vision was starting to blur from blood loss. She had been on the ledge for over 10 minutes, directing fire missions while her life slowly leaked out through her wounded legs. The combat stimulants were wearing off, leaving her weak and disoriented. But she couldn't stop now. Her soldiers were finally winning, and she needed to see this through to the end. A group of Catherian shock troops attempted to flank Rodriguez's position by climbing the western canyon wall. Sarah spotted them immediately and called in a precision strike that brought down half the cliff face. The aliens disappeared under tons of rock and debris, eliminating the flanking threat permanently. Target neutralized, Sarah reported through gritted teeth. Enemy forces down to approximately 20% strength. Outstanding work, Chen, came the reply from Firebase Tango. We're down to our last 3 rounds. Make them count. Sarah studied the remaining Catherian positions through her scope. Most of the aliens were trapped in a small cluster of boulders, pinned down by marine rifle fire but still dangerous. A single well-placed artillery shell could end the battle permanently. She calculated wind speed, trajectory, and timing with the precision of a master craftsman. Fire mission, danger close, Sarah transmitted. Grid reference 9-1 Charlie. Drop it right on top of them. The final shell screamed overhead and impacted directly in the center of the Catherian position. The explosion was so close to the marine lines that Sarah felt the shock wave through the canyon walls. When the smoke cleared, the alien resistance had been completely eliminated. Silence fell over the battlefield for the first time in hours. Sarah could hear birds calling from somewhere in the distance, their songs a stark contrast to the violence that had just ended. Below her, Marines were emerging from cover, checking for survivors and securing the area. They had won against impossible odds. All units sound off. Rodriguez's voice echoed through the canyon. Sarah listened as her soldiers reported in one by one. 37 survivors out of the original 40. 3 good Marines lost, but 37 saved by the artillery strike she had directed from this lonely ledge. The mathematics of war were cruel, but these numbers felt like victory. Rodriguez's voice came through her helmet speaker. Lieutenant, are you still alive up there? Sarah tried to respond but found that her voice wouldn't work. The combination of blood loss, exhaustion, and shock had finally overwhelmed her system. She managed to key her transmitter once, sending a brief electronic beep that served as confirmation. She was alive, but not by much. We're coming to get you, ma'am. Hang tight. Sarah wanted to tell them not to risk it. The climb was dangerous even for healthy soldiers, and she wasn't going anywhere. But her communication equipment had finally given up, damaged by the nearby artillery explosions. She was alone on the ledge with her thoughts and the growing certainty that she might not survive long enough for rescue. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the battle was fading now, leaving behind only pain and exhaustion. Sarah's broken legs had gone numb, which she knew was not a good sign. Her hands could barely maintain their grip on her rifle. Every breath was becoming an effort that required conscious thought. She used her remaining strength to activate her helmet's emergency beacon. If she died on this ledge, at least her body could be recovered and sent home to her family. Her parents deserved to know that their daughter had died fighting for something worthwhile. They deserved to know that her sacrifice had meaning. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of her soldiers organizing their rescue mission. She could hear equipment being gathered, ropes being tested, volunteers stepping forward for the dangerous climb. These Marines would risk their lives to save her, just as she had risked hers to save them. It was the eternal cycle of military brotherhood, the code that bound soldiers together across all boundaries of species and circumstance. The last thing Sarah heard before losing consciousness was the sound of boots on stone. Someone was climbing toward her position, moving with the careful precision of an expert mountaineer. Help was coming, but whether she would live long enough to receive it remained an open question. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as voices echoed around her. Someone was working on her legs, applying pressure bandages and injecting pain medication into her bloodstream. She felt herself being lifted carefully from the ledge, secured in a rescue harness that distributed her weight evenly. Easy does it, Rodriguez's voice said somewhere above her head. We've got you, Lieutenant. You're going home. The descent took over an hour. Sarah was only dimly aware of the careful movements as her rescue team lowered her down the cliff face. Every bump and scrape sent fresh waves of agony through her damaged legs. But the pain seemed distant now, muffled by medical drugs and shock. At the bottom of the canyon, the full extent of their victory became clear. Catherian bodies lay scattered across the battlefield, their advanced armor no protection against human artillery. The aliens' superior technology had been defeated by superior tactics, and the willingness of one soldier to sacrifice everything for her comrades. Dr. Martinez, the unit's medic, worked frantically to stabilize Sarah's condition. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, and both legs showed signs of severe nerve damage. The plasma burns had cauterized some blood vessels but damaged others beyond repair. She needed immediate evacuation to a proper medical facility. "How bad is it, Doc?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Martinez didn't answer directly, but his expression told the story. Sarah's injuries were life-threatening, possibly career-ending. The legs might be saved with advanced surgery, but full recovery was uncertain. She would live, but the cost of her heroism would follow her for the rest of her days. The evacuation helicopter arrived within 30 minutes, its medical bay equipped with the latest life support technology. Sarah was loaded aboard with careful efficiency, while her squad provided security. The Catherians might send reinforcements, and no one wanted to be caught in the open when they arrived. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah regained consciousness long enough to see the canyon falling away below. The battlefield looked different from above, smaller somehow. The massive Catherian formation that had seemed so overwhelming was revealed to be just another skirmish in humanity's ongoing war for survival. But for 40 Marines, it had been everything. Rodriguez leaned over her stretcher, his weathered face showing concern and gratitude in equal measure. "You did good, Lieutenant, real good. Those aliens never knew what hit them." Sarah tried to speak but managed only a weak smile. The medication was pulling her back toward unconsciousness, and she didn't fight it. The battle was over. Her soldiers were safe. She had done her duty as an officer and as a human being. Whatever came next could wait until she was stronger. The helicopter carried her across the alien landscape toward the human base camp. Below, the planet Kepler 442b stretched endlessly toward distant horizons, its surface scarred by years of warfare between two species fighting for the same worlds. Somewhere in that wilderness, other battles were being fought by other soldiers facing impossible odds. But for now, in this moment, humanity had won a small victory against the darkness. 40 Marines would live to fight another day because one woman had been willing to crawl 200 meters with broken legs to call in an artillery strike. It wasn't the kind of victory that would end the war, but it was the kind that reminded everyone why the war was worth fighting. Sarah's final thought before the darkness claimed her was of her squad gathering around Rodriguez for the mission debrief. They would share stories of her climb, embellishing the details with each telling until the facts became legend. In time, new recruits would hear about the lieutenant who took on an entire Catherian army from a cliff ledge. They would learn that humans didn't win through superior technology or overwhelming force. They won through courage, sacrifice, and the absolute refusal to abandon their comrades. They won because when death came calling, someone was always willing to answer the challenge and fight back with everything they had. They won because they were human, and humans never surrendered. The helicopter disappeared into the alien sky, carrying Sarah toward medical treatment and an uncertain future. Behind them, the canyon stood silent except for the wind whistling through stone formations millions of years old. The battle was over, but the war continued. Somewhere in the galaxy, other soldiers were preparing to follow Sarah's example, ready to sacrifice everything for the species they loved and the comrades they served beside. Humanity would endure because humans like Sarah Chen existed. They would endure because some things were worth dying for, and some people were brave enough to prove it when the moment came. The aliens might have superior technology, but they would never understand the human capacity for heroism in the face of impossible odds. That understanding would ultimately decide the war. 6 months later, Sarah Chen sat in her wheelchair on the observation deck of the orbital station above Kepler 442b. Her legs were gone. Amputated after complications from the plasma burns made reconstruction impossible. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was still serving humanity in the war against the Catherians. The station buzzed with activity as ships came and went, carrying supplies and reinforcements to the surface battles below. Sarah's new assignment as tactical coordinator kept her busy analyzing battle reports and developing strategies for ground commanders. Her experience in the canyon had made her something of a legend among the troops. "Ma'am," a young ensign approached her position, holding a data pad with obvious nervousness. "The generals are ready for your briefing on the Catherian defensive patterns." Sarah nodded and activated her wheelchair's mobility system. The advanced prosthetics allowed her to move with surprising speed and agility, though she would never climb another cliff face. Some limitations had to be accepted, but they didn't diminish her value as a soldier and strategist. The briefing room was filled with senior officers from across the human fleet. Sarah's analysis of Cytherian tactics had become required reading at the military academy, and her insights were sought after for every major operation. She had turned her personal experience into professional expertise. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice steady and confident, "the Cytherians have adapted their formations based on our artillery tactics. However, they still maintain predictable clustering patterns that can be exploited." She outlined her recommendations with the same precision she had once used to call in fire missions. The assembled officers listened intently, taking notes and asking detailed questions. These were experienced commanders, but they recognized superior tactical thinking when they heard it. After the briefing, General Harrison pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. The old soldier had fought in the earliest campaigns against the Cytherians and understood the personal cost of this war better than most. "Lieutenant, I have news from the surface," Harrison said quietly. "Sergeant Rodriguez and his team just completed another successful mission using tactics you developed. 0 casualties, complete objective achievement. Your methods are saving lives across the entire theater." Sarah felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest, the same satisfaction she had experienced on that cliff ledge, knowing her actions had protected her soldiers. The tactics she developed from her hospital bed were now being used by hundreds of Marine units, multiplying the effect of her sacrifice across countless battlefields. "There's something else," Harrison continued. "We've been monitoring Cytherian communications, and their military leadership is starting to question their invasion strategy. They're losing too many forces to human tactical innovation. Some factions are pushing for a negotiated settlement. The possibility of peace had seemed impossible just months ago. The Cytherians had appeared unstoppable, their technology centuries ahead of human capabilities. But humanity's refusal to surrender, combined with tactical adaptations like Sarah's, was forcing the aliens to reconsider their assumptions about easy conquest." Sarah wheeled herself to the viewport and looked down at the planet's surface. Somewhere in those mountains and valleys, Marines were still fighting and dying in humanity's struggle for survival, but now they fought with better tactics, improved coordination, and the knowledge that their sacrifices had meaning beyond individual battles. Rodriguez's latest message appeared on her personal communication device. The grizzled sergeant never missed an opportunity to update his former commanding officer on the unit's activities. His reports always ended the same way. "Still standing because of what you taught us, ma'am." The 40 Marines Sarah had saved in the canyon had become the nucleus of an expanded battalion. They trained new recruits, sharing the lessons learned from their desperate battle against overwhelming odds. Each soldier they trained carried those lessons to other units, spreading tactical innovation throughout the human military. Sarah's sacrifice had rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Her willingness to crawl 200 meters with broken legs had not only saved 40 lives that day, but had contributed to saving thousands more in subsequent battles. The tactics born from her desperate improvisation were now standard doctrine. More importantly, her example had shown other soldiers what was possible when humans refused to accept defeat. Stories of her climb had spread throughout the fleet, inspiring acts of heroism in the darkest moments of the war. When faced with impossible odds, soldiers asked themselves what Lieutenant Chen would do, and found strength they didn't know they possessed. The war was far from over, but humanity was no longer just surviving. They were adapting, innovating, and fighting back with a determination that surprised even their alien enemies. The Cytherians had expected to conquer a primitive species with superior technology. Instead, they found themselves locked in a grinding conflict with beings who simply refused to surrender. Sarah Chen had helped prove that humans were more than their technology or their numbers. They were their courage, their sacrifice, and their absolute refusal to abandon each other in the face of extinction. These qualities could not be measured by alien sensors or countered by superior weapons. They could only be met with the same determination, and the Cytherians were discovering they lacked that essential human quality. The communication alert on Sarah's tablet chimed softly. Another message from the front lines, another confirmation that her tactical innovations were working. This time it was from Lieutenant Morrison, a young officer who had studied Sarah's canyon battle as part of his advanced training. His unit had just successfully defended a supply depot against a Cytherian assault force 3 times their size. Use the Chen maneuver to coordinate artillery support, Morrison's report read. Enemy formation neutralized with minimal friendly casualties. These aliens still haven't figured out how to counter human adaptability. Sarah smiled at the reference to the Chen maneuver, the official designation for the tactical doctrine she had developed. It felt strange to have a military procedure named after her, but she understood the importance of giving soldiers something concrete to remember. When facing death, abstract concepts meant less than proven methods with familiar names. The tactical revolution sparked by her desperate climb had transformed human military doctrine. Traditional formations and strategies had given way to flexible, adaptive approaches that emphasized individual initiative and tactical innovation. Human commanders no longer tried to match Catherian technology directly. Instead, they used creativity and determination to turn the aliens' advantages against them. General Harrison returned to her position by the viewport, carrying a sealed envelope with official military markings. Sarah recognized the format immediately. It was a field promotion notification. She had been expecting this for weeks, though part of her felt unworthy of advancement, earned from a hospital bed rather than active combat. Congratulations, Captain Chen, Harrison said formally, handing her the envelope. Your promotion is effective immediately, along with assignment as Chief Tactical Advisor for the entire Kepler sector. The Joint Chiefs want your expertise applied across all active theaters. Sarah accepted the promotion with mixed emotions. The rank meant recognition of her contributions, but it also meant moving further away from direct combat operations. She would be coordinating battles rather than fighting them, analyzing data instead of facing enemy fire. It was necessary work, but it felt distant from the immediate camaraderie of the Marines she had served with. There's one more thing, Harrison added quietly. Intelligence reports suggest the Catherians are developing new countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize your tactical innovations. They're studying human behavior patterns, trying to predict our adaptations before we can implement them. The news wasn't entirely surprising. Sarah had always known the aliens would eventually adapt to human methods, just as humans had adapted to theirs. The war was becoming a complex dance of innovation and counter-innovation, each side struggling to stay ahead of the other's developments. But Sarah felt confident about humanity's chances in that contest. Human creativity was limitless when survival was at stake. For every countermeasure the Catherians developed, human commanders would find new approaches and unexpected solutions. The species that had produced Sarah's desperate climb up a canyon wall would never run out of new ways to fight. As night fell over the orbital station, Sarah remained at the viewport, watching the lights of human settlements twinkle across the planet's surface. Each light represented people who were alive, because soldiers like her had been willing to sacrifice everything for their protection. The responsibility felt overwhelming sometimes, but it also provided unshakable purpose. Her personal communicator buzzed with another message, this one from her parents back on Earth. They had seen the news reports about her promotion and wanted to express their pride. The message was filled with love and worry in equal measure, the eternal burden of military families watching their loved ones serve in distant wars. Sarah composed a careful reply, assuring them she was safe and useful in her new position.